welcome to another episode of the MarketingCrew podcast. And today we have with us one of our very good clients, Maithili, who runs a setup called Craft Connection in Paris. And she's with us today to share her journey and talk about just fashion as usual all over the world and trends that are happening and everything that she feels is changing the fashion world today. So, Maithili, can you start off by telling us a little about yourself and...
Yeah. So my name is Maithili. I'm the founder of now what is called Craft Connection. Connection just because we live in France and it's based in India. I've worked 12 years or 10 years in digital marketing, mostly for fashion and lifestyle brands. And then when I moved here, I initially launched a fashion brand called Bono Behen, which I managed for like 2 years. And then I slowly pivoted towards Craft Connection, is what I do now, because I felt it was more aligned to what I want to do and also like a larger mission that I have.
And how come you decided to make this transition? Like, I'm guessing Bono Behen for you was something that you started with, but then you saw a need for Craft Connection or...
Yeah. So what happened, I realized like when I moved away from India, like in India, crafts are so kind of omnipresent, right? Like even if you're not a designer, you still go to local markets, you find crafts, you've traveled in India, you kind of know a little bit about them. When I moved here and I decided, okay, I want to start Bono Behen, I had to figure out all my production from a distance. So I did travel to India for almost like a year. I did a lot of groundwork and I realized it's super hard, even for me as an Indian, to find like these craft clusters because it's such a decentralized way of working that unless you're in the industry and you really know, unless you like went to NIFT or something and you have those connections, it's kind of hard to start. And I realized that if it's this hard for me, being an Indian, someone who speaks the language, I can only imagine if that's not the case for you, then how much harder that would be for people that are not necessarily from that culture. So I realized early on that maybe there is a space for this, but I wasn't 100% sure. I became 100% sure when I launched the idea, and then the response was supremely positive. Like everyone was like, oh my God, this is what we needed. So I think that was my kind of validation point for the offering.
And so from my understanding, what exactly does Craft Connection do? It connects fashion brands in Europe or in the US or anywhere in the world looking to source local Indian crafts and handicrafts.
Yeah. So Craft Connection is essentially what I call a craft consultancy. What it does is it connects conscious fashion brand founders in wherever, Europe, let's say global north, or even global south, with craft collectives mostly in India because I'm Indian, that's where most of my network is. But we're also now starting to connect a little bit with Afghanistan, a little bit with Africa and like Latin America kind of vibe. But it's essentially creating a bridge between, I would say, the grassroots kind of craft communities in the global south to the larger industry in the global north. So that's been my interest area since I have moved here, and that's always been like a larger mission for me to give them a platform and like almost like an equal seat at the table.
Can you tell me like about the fashion trend, because now more and more brands are choosing to go sustainable. They're choosing more and more to go supporting artisans. And that, how does all of that play into Craft Connection's USP?
So I think for the past maybe a year or two, suddenly Craftco has become like a thing where you will see major brands like also like Dior and luxury brands doing not exactly a collaborative collection with India, but at least now they are saying that, hey, we partner with India. That was always the case. People think that it's suddenly that people are starting to partner with India. That's not. It's always been the case. We are a production hub for most of fashion brands across the world. Now what has shifted is slowly the transparency aspect of it, that's saying, hey, yeah, this craftsmanship is coming from here, or I don't remember which brand, but I think it was Dior that did a fashion, like a runway show in Mumbai. So it's it's changing in that aspect where people are already kind of crediting craftsmanship. But on the other side, you also have people like Prada who stole Kolhapuri, like the exact replica of Kolhapuri chappals, and no credit was given. And then, you had activism, and then slowly they went back to the artisans. So you have players on both sides of the equation. But what has changed, I feel, in the collective, let's say, consumer psyche, is that they are starting to see craft as becoming cool again, or something that they are seeing more and more of on a global stage. And for me, that presents an opportunity to then kind of not, I wouldn't say capitalize necessarily on the trend, but to kind of ride this newfound interest that exists and bring more craft collectives into light, and showcase the amazing work that they have been doing for years, but now that is getting already the recognition that they deserve.
And how does the process exactly work? So say suppose a brand approaches you, if they're interested in a particular style of craft, you travel back to India and you source it. How does your process work, and what is an ideal client for you?
So ideal client for me is actually the one I work with, which is Zazi, Jan, who's the founder. She's been doing this for, I don't know, 9 or 10 years now. And it's a very collaborative way of working. So the process for me, so let's say, for instance, the ideal thing is that I do everything A to Z. So let's say a client is like, hey, we're thinking of doing our spring summer collection. This is what we had in mind. What are the kind of crafts that you think we could integrate in? This is the vision for it. And that's how we usually start with Zazi. Jan will say, Maithili, this year I feel like floral, or, like this is the vibe that I want. And then I will think of crafts that could go well with that collection. And then essentially it's a dialogue between the craftsmanship and the craftspeople and the brand. So then, for instance, let's say we're working with Ajrak. Then it's for me to make Jan understand what Ajrak is. I'll give her the whole technical context, and then we actually create a dialogue between the craft person and them, and then they tell us, okay, this is possible, we don't feel comfortable doing this, or this maybe we would need a longer time period because it's an R&D. And then through that dialogue, we create the final product. So it's not top down. We don't create the design and just be like, hey, this is executed. So we actually take their opinion into matter. We see what they want to design, and then it's like finding the sweet spot between what the brand wants and then what the craft people are comfortable doing. And that is essentially my job. My job is to create a dialogue and create a bridge between the two.
Understood. And does it help to so normally when you try to source, is it normally India that you source from, or now when you're pitching to a client, you also pitch from other countries, say Africa or?
So it usually starts with the brand and what they want to do. Now my network is mostly, I would say, India or a little bit South Asia. So it could be India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, a little bit of that. And then we start from there. So a lot of clients will come with like an empty slate. They are just like one of my clients, for instance, she's a lawyer. It's nothing to do with the fashion industry. She wanted to start her own brand. So for her, it was really going to what are your values? What are the materials you want to work with? So really almost like building a brand with her and then coming up with a collection line and then going into production. Some clients already have like a very established, let's say, creative vision, like they want this kind of product. So then it's just finding the collectives that kind of would fit into that vision. Yeah. What a lot of people do not realize is that I launched this after 5 years of working within the craft industry. So those 5 years were kind of imperative to find all the network, to kind of figure out who I want to work with, how do they work, how does the brands, figuring that puzzle out. And now I have a good enough network that I can tap into. But a lot of work initially goes into building trust and building these connections with the artisans.
And the fact that you come from a marketing background, because you used to work in marketing before, and then you had your own fashion brand, and then you have now running CraftConnection. Does that play in somewhere? Because I'm guessing anything that you create has to have a marketing angle to it or story to it. So does CraftConnection help building that story as well?
Yes. So I think like my entire career graph, even though I don't work, let's say, directly in marketing anymore, but having that base knowledge always helps me when I am looking at people like, let's say, Tamara, who are just starting, to even tell them how they should approach because fashion is a fairly saturated field, and it's like the food industry. It's very hard to make through, like, to build a product that people want. So how do you go about it? Marketing is essentially trying to figure out what is it that people need, and then making that product and then finding the right channels to distribute it, right? In a nutshell, that is what marketing is. So that's how I approach brand when you're forming a brand. So that knowledge really helps me. The fact that I ran a brand and I did it as a single, like a solopreneur, I know the challenges that small brands face. You're doing everything alone. So that also then helps me figure out how can I help them better? Sometimes you have to delegate, like you can't do everything alone. So I also help them in that challenge where they feel overwhelmed and alone and don't know where to go. So pivoting strategies come from that, how to have multiple revenue streams. So a lot of my experience actually helps me be a better partner or a better consultant to brands, especially small brands that are just starting their journey.
One of the questions I'd like to ask you is, like, say, suppose I was a fashion brand owner.
Yeah.
Okay. If we want to create a collection, walk me through the process. How does it work with you?
Got it. So there are two ways of doing it. One, let's say you don't have any idea. You're just like, hey, I love fashion, I want to start a brand. Then there we start with like the very basics. What are your values? What materials? All of that work. And then we'll say, okay, now what is your creative vision? We also help you with, if you're starting out, you can't have a massive inventory. So what are the products that you can do that are kind of agnostic, and you don't have to do like a lot of SKUs of it? And then you test. You essentially create 2 really good products, you test, see if they work, and then you go from there. Other is, let's say you're already a brand, you've been in the market for 5, 6, 3, whatever years. You have some of your initial clients. In that case, it's essentially, let's say you said this year I want to make a collection that is working with, let's say, indigenous materials, and we want to find dyeing forms that use natural dyes. Then I will go like, okay, these are the collectives that work with, let's say, eri silk or kala cotton or other kind of indigenous materials to India. Then I will find you craft forms that I think would work with your visual aesthetic, and then essentially I'll create partnerships. Now either I can create partnerships and you manage your production, that's also possible. In most cases, brands don't want to do that because they have 10 other million things to. So they're like, Maithili, you create the partnership and you manage the production as well. So then it essentially goes into, okay, we need tech packs. Then the tech pack has to be in terms of what artisans would kind of, then you translate that to what brief you would give the artisans. Then they will translate it to what brief they give to the artisans that work from home. So finding the right collectives based on your values. If you tell me I only want to work with women benefiting collectives, then I find you women benefiting collectives. If you want to work with people who have certifications, are hard, and that's a whole other topic I can go into. But let's say you say, hey, we want to work with recycled or upcycled materials. So you give me what are your values, and I will find you the right partners to co-create with. Essentially, at the heart of it is just that. I'm the connector. Like I said, that's why it's craft connection. Yes.
Okay. And just for my curiosity, how do normally commercials work with you? Like for a fashion brand, how can they think, they need to factor in costs wherein your agency comes in? So if you can explain and elaborate on that.
So we have packages. We have, for instance, one package which is just design and consulting, which is priced at, I think it starts at 250 euros. And then that is essentially me hand-holding you through the entire process of how to start a brand. Then you also have something where it's sourcing, where you have your designers, you already probably have a production team, you don't need me to manage production, but you just want me to find you the right partners you can source from. So you have a sourcing package, and then that is a flexible thing based on what you want. And the final one is essentially the whole thing where I manage your production, and that again depending on the scope, but that starts, I think that would start at, I would say, somewhere like a 600, 800 depending on the scope, and then it can go upwards. And the very basic one, sometimes I also have brands who are like, I want to go to India. I want to go to India, I want to see the collectives. So then I just essentially charge them a connection fee. I will create like an itinerary of which partners they can visit. The pricing is fairly transparent on my end. I charge mostly the brands upfront. I don't really charge the craft collectives anything. Or at the most it's like a nominal, like a 5-10% markup or something like that. But it's really transparent on both sides.
And what do you have to say about overall the fashion industry? I mean, now you're based in Europe, but you're from India. You've lived both worlds, and you continue to thrive in both. Where do you see what's growing, what's shrinking? Where is it going?
So this year alone, and I think this would be an interesting insight, especially for brands that are not based out of Europe. The trade shows, the bigger trade shows have shrunk in size. So WSN, which at some point had like 7 halls, last year had 4, this year had 1. So you can see, so that's a direct impact of like, that's a direct representation of where the retail industry right now is at. There has been a global slowdown. I think a lot of like business or fashion, all of them have talked about luxury slowdown and fashion slowdown in general. But I feel from speaking to a lot of brands that came to, let's say, for WSN for the first time, there was mixed reaction. So for smaller brands, it worked slightly better because now there's less decision fatigue because it's not like 7 halls that, buyers have to navigate through. So in a way, they did get some visibility, which is harder generally. And I think, in my opinion, what could present as an opportunity for a lot of small brands especially is a lot of retail stores are struggling to make rent because Paris is not cheap. You know the rents here. So it presents an opportunity that a lot of them are now looking for alternate ways of getting people in. Experiences are doing well. Like if you do like a block printing workshop, weaving workshop, that usually drives a lot of traffic. So there's an opportunity for small brands to approach these stores and figure another model of working with them rather than just the very traditional, hey, you buy my pieces, put them in the store and whatever, you take a commission, however that works. Now you could essentially maybe create an event with them. You could do workshops, like regular workshops with them because it's interesting for them to get people in. Co-working is working. I know a lot of like boutiques who have the space have now just opened out like a co-working space for maybe different designers to come in and do their thing. So it has slowed down for sure, but then you also have these other kind of opportunities that are sort of opening up. Fast fashion, unfortunately, seems to be doing okay, but I'm not talking about that sector of fashion. I'm really talking about, let's say, sustainable, artisan, conscious fashion collective, and I think this is what I would like to see more of.
Oh, and as Craft Connects, you told me a bunch of opportunities. Can you tell me what exactly are the pain points that you solve for the fashion brand owners?
So the number one pain point, I think, is I save them a lot of research time and a lot of trial and error. Because what happens as a owner, let's say if you were to do this work, you go to India, you will find a collective and then you will work with them, and during that process you'll figure out whether they work well, they don't, So I kind of eliminate that process because I have worked with them for several other clients. I know that they work well. So it's almost like I do that vetting and that research process for you. So that's number one. Second, when you're starting out, you don't really know how to manage your inventory. How many SKUs do you make? What is the pricing like? What is my market like? Because I've worked in India, I've worked in Europe, I've worked as a marketing manager. So I kind of also I manage that puzzle for you. So I initially help you do your market research. I help you kind of figure out what is your product, where should it sit, and then what are the channels that you can use to reach your audiences. And then for the final one, and which is a headache for most brands, especially run by a small team, is to have and this is something I realized through my experience with the brands I work with. I realized that initially I was a bit doubtful. I was like, why would they hire me? They can just go to India and hire like a production manager in India for like probably 2x cheaper than what I am charging. But I realized that the fact that I'm actually between the two countries ended up being an advantage somehow, because I realized that I can be legally held accountable because I come under the European jurisdiction. So it's easy to hold my neck as opposed to going to India and be like, hey, you didn't do your job well. And second, I realized that because I understand how Europe functions and their kind of sales cycle, all of that, I can translate that well. So I'm almost like in a sweet spot of two kind of countries, and that is the biggest advantage. So I manage the production for you, and you have a person that understands both cultures, and that makes the process a little easier, especially for brands that work across different countries.
Got it. And where do you see the future? When do you plan on taking Craft Connects here?
So this, I love doing it. So this part of the offering that I just explained is called co-design, because that's what we essentially do. There are two other things that I am kind of working on. Initially, I've studied English literature, so writing was always my first love. So I'm trying to build a Substack where I just talk about different craft collectives, amazing craft collectives that I work with, hopefully interview the founders and get them more visibility. And through that also maybe create opportunities for them to tell their story in their voice, rather than it coming from me all the time. So that is one. And the last one, which is like a dream project of mine, it'll take me maybe a year or 2 or 3 to kind of build that out, but which is like a craft residency between France and maybe India to begin with, where different players of industry come together. And really it's not always about just creating a collection, but then that is about, hey, how do we create a bridge where India is not always like a producer, or craft people are not always like, hey, we just produce for you, but they are given an equal stance, so they understand that ecosystem. And a lot of the climate solutions, quite frankly, that the fashion industry is looking for already exist. They already exist in these models. We just have to amplify them. So the craft residency would become this point on how to bring more of these voices from Global South into places like, let's say, an S Mode as a guest lecturer, or like create those kind of dialogue and channels between. And that's like a dream project, and hopefully in the next few years we'll see that happen.
I see how you can make that happen. I mean, if there is anybody who can make this happen, I feel you are well positioned as it could be.
Thank you.
And it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Maithili,
Same.
and learning about everything that you're doing. It's something extremely niche, something I didn't know existed. And since you have started working with us, it's really been fun to understanding your world and contributing to it in some way. I hope our journey goes on for long, because I would love to be invited to this craft residency someday. And yes,
You'll do all my content. I will ever pay for that. No, I hope so too.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.